Welcome to Same Surgeon, Different Light. This is part of the Society of Thoracic Surgeons Surgical Hot Topics podcast. My name is Cherie Erkmen, and together with Sara Pereira, we will meet cardiothoracic surgeons from across the spectrum of our rich community. We'll learn about backstories, career challenges, and what makes each cardiothoracic surgeon unique and valued. The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. My name is Cherie Erkmen, and I'm honored to kick off this first episode of Same Surgeon, Different Light, Season 5. This is a transition episode, as Dr. Sara Pereira and I will take over as hosts of the podcast. When Sara and I started to digest what a huge responsibility this is, and what a profound impact you, Dr. Cooke and Dr. Varghese have had, we agreed that you had to have two of you as our first guests. And I would like to tell you that I feel like this is my first day of internship, and I'm very stressed about getting sign out from you, but welcome.
Thank you, Cherie. And thank you, Drs. Varghese and Dr. Cooke, for this really great opportunity. I think we're nervous about the shoes that we have to fill in running these podcasts. And I'm truly honored to be a part of the Same Surgeon, Different Light podcasts. And we really look forward to getting your insight and advice for our future podcasts. First, I really would love to discuss exactly what you have both accomplished over the past 4 years with the Same Surgeon, Different Light series. So over the past 4 seasons, you both independently recorded 44 episodes, which was an average of 1,200 downloads per episode. And in terms of the listeners, we were really interested to hear that there was an international distribution. 70% of the listeners came from the United States, but 30% were worldwide, including a solid listener base in Japan, India, Canada, and the UK. David, what inspired you to create these podcasts, and why did you use this format to accomplish this goal?
First of all, I really want to thank you, Sara and Cherie, for inviting us on today, and really thank you for taking on this responsibility for these podcasts. Cherie, my advice for first day of internship is to remember to eat. I also want to thank Tom. Tom has been sort of my partner in crime in these podcasts, and I've really enjoyed listening to his episodes and insights, and also like to thank the STS staff who have been really technical wizards in getting this podcast together. And they composed the intro music, and I listen to the intro music as I work out. It's inspiring. So you asked, well, why these podcasts, and I think it goes to the name, Same Surgeon, Different Light, and that just kind of popped to me because from my experience, and all of you can attest to this, we've had mentors throughout our cardiothoracic surgical experience. All 4 of us are kind of atypical cardiothoracic surgeons when the lay person imagines a cardiothoracic surgeon. But the reality is that we are very typical and common cardiothoracic surgeons when you actually see the reality of who represents cardiothoracic surgery. People from all different backgrounds, different origin stories, and I'm not sure that's understood amongst people who could become cardiothoracic surgeons. And even the folks who are on that Mount Rushmore, so to speak, who are these kind of famous, powerful figures, we've all had sort of conversations with them in their most vulnerable moments where it's like, I didn't know that about you. That's really fascinating. Now I know why you do what you do and what motivates you. And I wanted others to see that same surgeon, but in a different light. And I think we can all see ourselves in these individuals who maybe we thought we couldn't see ourselves in them, and then say to ourselves, why not us as a cardiothoracic surgeon? So that's, from my perspective, the derivation of putting these things together. And I really like to thank the Workforce and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for having the growth mindset to do this, and thank the STS, because very few organizations, I think, would have the courage to have these kind of difficult conversations and sending them out there, for the most part, unedited. I always said to my interviewee, if you want, we can edit this if you say something you feel is uncomfortable, and no one ever took me up on that.
Thank you for that. I wanted to bring Tom into the conversation. Um, was there anything surprising or unexpected that happened along the way of your
Yeah,
interview?
yeah, it's a great question, Dr. Erkman. And yeah, I echo Dr. Cook's comments. I mean, this has been a huge honor and a privilege to actively engage in these episodes. It's interesting, even though David and I kind of came out with that intent of same surgeon, different light, it's the different lights that was really surprising each and every single time. Like, we were intentionally seeking it, but when we stumbled upon that, it was very eye-opening. So I'll give you a classic example as a surrogate for those shining different lights. One of my cherished mentors is Dr. Doug Wood, who's the Henry Harkins Professor and Chair of Department of Surgery at the University of Washington, and who I happened to be partners with for 8 years. Well, my first job coming out of practice. When we deep dived into his story, all of it traced back to is he grew up in this small community in Michigan, in Oswego, Michigan, and a biology teacher took interest into him. And then for a $35 application, that's what it took for him to send his application to Harvard. It wasn't this, he grew up one day and he was going to be this world famous, elite trained CT surgeon from Harvard Medical School and Mass General Surgery and CT surgery training programs. It was just being opportunistic, and a teacher took interest in them. And every episode, we always found something like this. When you interviewed Dr. Stephanie Fuller, and you found out that she's got a passion for caring about conservation of rhinos around the world. It was just, there was always these little eye-opening things. And what I like to do, I mean, I know David likes to listen to the theme music to get him psyched up for his workout, but I sometimes go back to some of these episodes and re-listen again to say, what was that pearl of wisdom, or what was that little light that, yes, there's many commonalities in our trainings in terms of the rigor of cardiothoracic surgical training, but oftentimes the pathway or that discovery towards how we got into that world in the first place sometimes is just being at the right place at the right time.
And a follow-up question to you, was there anything that you did to bring that story out, or was it just this organic process? Because of course we're worried about getting that special spark.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think David and I found was, yes, we had some structured questions, but we always encourage the people we were interviewing that we would be happy to go in any direction that we wanted to. I mean, just having all of you on the screen right now. I mean, I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Sara Pereira, and then when she started reflecting back on, when you hear the word Cupertino, California, you think of Apple and this gigantic thing, this huge enterprise that's been built there. But then Dr. Pereira correctly pointed out that way back when she was growing up, it was a bunch of farms, and just letting people just share their story. It was just really more about, it's just started with curiosity and asking a couple of prompted questions, and inevitably those little jewels came out, those pearls of wisdom came out during the conversation.
That's really great. I look back to some of my favorite episodes of Same Surgeon, Different Light, and I remember learning that Dr. Cooke and I went to the same college together, and I thought that was amazing, and I learned it from this podcast. So,
Yeah, you, me, and Cherie were all at Cal at the same time.
which is truly remarkable that I think amongst our STS committees, we have found all these little sparks that tie us all together. Do you have a particularly memorable interview, David, or is there an interview that you wish you would have done over or asked different questions?
I have a lot of really interesting nuggets that that kind of sparked that I didn't know would be there, and then also some things that I kind of understood would be there, but I came in wanting to tease it out. So one was with Dr. Mark Oringer. Tom and I went to University of Michigan for our fellowship, and my first time in the Midwest, and I was struck about Dr. Oringer and his wife, Mrs. Oringer, and the inclusiveness that they try to develop for their group and their division. And I wanted to tease that out, and I wanted to see how it was related to Dr. Oringer's faith and the Jewish culture of community and bringing people in, because I know that he had mentioned that in the past. And what I got to talking with him, he spent his residency at Johns Hopkins, and he worked with Vivian Thomas actually at Johns Hopkins, and Vivian Thomas actually walked him through his puppy's spade procedure, believe it or not. But he also talked about how he worked on a segregated floor, and that's where they put the intern, was on the blacks only floor. And he remembered thinking to himself, this is wrong. This is not the way it should be. And that kind of led him to how he envisioned a surgical service should run and be an inclusive environment. I didn't anticipate that. And I wanted to ask more questions, but it kind of just escaped me at the time. Another example is Dr. Rich Prager. Dr. Rich Prager started the Task Force on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which became a workforce. And I asked him, why did you feel compelled to start this task force and then workforce? And he grew up in Brooklyn, and his dad was a primary care doctor who did house calls in Brooklyn. And he accompanied his dad through all these different neighborhoods and communities in Brooklyn, which were diverse, Black, white, Latino, Jewish, Catholic, Irish. And he learned how his dad worked with all these different types of folks to help them in their care. And that is what sort of guided him in his care. And then a final one, and I'll talk about others as we talk more, but Ryan Hassan, who at the time was at Dartmouth, thoracic surgeon, and now she's vice chair for DEI at the Brigham and Women's Hospital and General Thoracic Surgery. She's also a Cal alum. And we talked about her experience, and she was actually in the same sorority and sorority chapter as my mom at Cal Berkeley, but just by maybe 40 years difference. And that kind of rang home with me because my mom had passed away within a couple of weeks of that interview. And so that was sort of an emotional interview for me at that time, having learned Ryan's background, which I didn't know, and how it connected with my family and my mom. And Ryan being, a super successful and inspiring individual. And so that kind of resonated with me at that time.
I think what I hear that's really fascinating, not only about the podcast, but about all of our individual connections and colleges, is really how much we all have in common, yet we're all so different. And I think these podcasts have really been so popular through the years because we've all learned these little pieces about our mentors and our epic surgeons that we all look up to, which has been really fascinating.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think what people have come up to me about, I'm always surprised, that people listen to the podcast. So when people come up to me and talk about them, I'm like shocked. And I get a lot of young people, trainees, residents, students who come up to me and they said, there's something that I found in the podcast that made me feel better. And it's almost like I could take a podcast and write it as like a prescription for folks when they have something that they need. There's something in one of the podcasts. So a couple of the most famous folks in the podcast didn't match, whether it's for general surgery residency or didn't match for fellowship. And here they are, chiefs and chairs. There's the immigrant success story, which Tom is one. Melanie Edwards is another one, from Jamaica to Canada to here. Tom Nguyen from Vietnam. And that story, finding the American dream and becoming leaders in that regard. And then folks like Leah Backus, who wanted to be a neurosurgeon and thought that she was going to be a neurosurgeon, but neurosurgery did not embrace her, but cardiothoracic surgeons did at USC. And now it's neurosurgery's loss in our gain. So those are just things that a trainee would come up to me and said, Sara Pereira, Roger Flores really inspired me, and I could be a Latina in cardiothoracic surgery. And I say, well, come to UC Davis and let me interview you on the podcast.
I think the podcast also gives people a reason to connect with others. Many times I'll introduce myself and say, I heard your podcast. And that was a very moving part of it, or the story. And it's a nice introduction. You feel like you already know the person in a way, but it's been a great icebreaker and a way to share stories. So I really appreciate it. And you did mention Raja Flores, and I have to tell you, that was my favorite podcast because I knew he was my chief resident, and I knew it was going to be incredibly colorful. My very first case that I did in thoracic surgery was watching Raja Flores and Sugar Baker operate a lobectomy. In that particular case, he actually put that big fish hook #2 vicral suture into Sugar Baker's thumb. And there is this long string of a colorful interplay and response. And I was like, thoracic surgery is awesome. So that experience was so like colorful and moving. I'm like, okay, this is gonna be great. And Raja's podcast episodes started out very like conservative and quiet and humble. I'm like, come on, David, you can bring it out. And sure enough, like midway through, you got him talking about the New York Housing Authority and that whole explanation of what inspired him to run for mayor of New York City. That was just, it was funny to see that transformation because you were really able to pull him out of this kind of shy and humble mode to the real Raja that we know. And Sara, you did mention some of your favorite episode.
Yeah, thanks, Cherie. I remember listening to Daniela Molina's episode when I was flying to New York, um, one meeting, and I've always really admired her and thought she was just not approachable, I mean, whether it be the imposter syndrome or whatever, but I had no idea that she failed being a stay-at-home mother and, came from Italy with this really great, unique path to Memorial Sloan Kettering. And so it was really, truly inspiring for me to hear her story. And then for me to hear how much she laughed during that episode was really great. So it's been fun to watch all of our successes as president of Women in Thoracic Surgery this last year.
I'll do an anecdote to say, Sara, the only failure I did was I was trying to dig up, as people who heard the episode, she paid for medical school by winning a national dance competition in Italy. And I was trying to dig that video up ahead of her introduction as president of the Women in Thoracic Surgery. I failed, but I'm still going to keep searching for that video because I think all of us would enjoy watching that video at one point.
It's got to be out there somewhere.
It's got to be out there somewhere. I think I have to track down her mom in Italy to do this, but I'll keep searching for it.
Yeah, and as you know, we have the Exceptional Women in Thoracic Surgery breakfast every year at STS. So hopefully she'll be one of the nominated women one of these years and we can show that.
We can show the video to everybody. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. So Tom, as you know, and as we all talk about, the early Same Surgeon, Different Light podcasts were developed during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I don't think any of us knew early in 2020 the impact of what podcasts were going to do and how popular they were going to be. But they almost revolutionized all of our stay-at-home time where people would do their work with earplugs in and really look forward to the next podcasts. So when you and David were initially thinking about who you wanted to interview and where you wanted to take the series, did you plan to anchor each interview starting in the pandemic with a time or historical context? Or did you want all of these podcasts to have this timeless quality?
That's a fantastic question. I think the honest answer from both David and my perspective is we wanted to do both. You know, as probably people can tell, I am not an introvert. I mean, I love people. I love going to meetings. I love networking. And for me personally, the pandemic was a challenging time. And the podcasts were a mechanism or a method for us to continue reaching out to people and knowing that that message was being broadcast to so many people across the world. And it was soul rejuvenating for myself, you know, in terms of interviewing these phenomenal leaders in CT surgery during that period of time. And so we wanted to acknowledge the pandemic, but we were also looking to do some, you know, timeless lessons, you know, kind of like David iterated to earlier, that we want people to go back and listen to these old podcast episodes and continue searching for those pearls of wisdom in that. So we were doing both. But, you know, one of the things we were very mindful of was especially for very junior faculty members. You know, the COVID pandemic years took things away from them, you know, those opportunities to network, those opportunities to connect. And then we wanted that storytelling to serve as a bridge to continue to inspire them, to reassure them that absolutely they were on the right path and they can continue to build going forward. So I didn't know if David, if you wanted to add any comments about your thoughts during the pandemic.
Yeah, so I would say when we talked about the pandemic, I would say, or other, I think there were some discussions on FDA approvals and things like that. I would say at the time of this taping, right? I wanted to get, you know, as Tom would say, you know, their origin story. So that was a big chunk of the podcast. You know, what made them tick? What, you know, why are they here? But especially when we were in the thick of the podcast, many of these individuals are leaders. And I wanted to get their insights on how they maintain their teams, maintain morale, and created a cohesive infrastructure of effective care and leadership in the time of a crisis. And so I did utilize the pandemic to tease out what their views and their strategies were in that regard. They were all successful leaders and accomplished. And so that did have that effect. You know, we did have a taped live at the STS meeting with Ike Okereke of Henry Ford, and Mark Henderson, who's not a surgeon, but leads our admissions office at UC Davis Health, at the time of the SCOTUS decision eliminating affirmative action in higher education admissions. And so that was very focused on what was going on at the moment to provide sort of insights for our cardiothoracic graduate medical education communities. And so didn't have much in terms of origin story there. But for the most part, a little bit based off of what's happening at the moment, but a lot based off what brought them to that moment.
This question is related to that, Tom. Um, Over these 4 years, there have been tremendous swings in terms of how people express the value of diversity. For example, 3 or 4 years ago, the value of diversity was integral to training. Conversations were welcome, and the political climate has changed, and many diversity programs are actually struggling for support. How can a program like Same Surgeon, Different Light fit into today's climate and stay relevant amid the changing priorities?
Easy questions. Yeah. It's a fantastic question, and
So
it's
now we
very
know how our guests feel.
yeah, there you go.
We're in
Yeah,
the,
we're
we're in the hot
uh,
seat.
in the hot seat. Um, I think it goes back to what binds all of us together in humanity. Um, One of the most powerful things that we all have is we love stories. You could hear a lecture, but if you tie that in with the story, that really resonates. The reasons one of the core reasons why humans evolved is that telling of story and having people connect with parts of the story. And I think that when I look at diversity, and I know that David feels similar to what I feel in the sense that we're not looking at a single race or a creed or a religion or a background. We're looking at it as aspect of how do we bring people in from a diverse, rich network of backgrounds into our field of cardiothoracic surgery, or what inspired them to pursue that in the first place. And I think that once you start there, you realize that it's always going to be an ongoing effort. We want to make our culture as inclusive as possible. We want to embrace wherever somebody is coming from into our field of cardiothoracic surgery because that benefits our patients. The reason we do each and every single thing we do, the innovation, the science, the clinical care, the surgeries, is because we're trying to deliver the best care for our patients at all times. That's what inspired all of us to be part of this in the first place. Um, it shouldn't be unexpected that the backlash is there. In the history of humankind, every time there's been a change movement, there's always been a backlash. We shouldn't be surprised by that. But to me, make that meaningful difference going forward, it just means that we just have to continue doing the good work and relate it back to why are we doing this? We want to be actively involved in building a better world. We want to make sure that our patients, wherever they are in the world, receive the best and brightest talent taking care of them at all times. And we want to constantly look at opportunities where we can evolve and improve. Um, but the realization along with that means that the work is never done and that we need to be open to having people involved in this and be open to differing viewpoints. I think that the danger for us is whenever we say things like there's nothing more to improve or this is the only way forward. I think that's when we become on the cusp of irrelevancy. And so I think that that's where we take that angle and then see how things are. Now, everything I said doesn't mean there's easy solutions. And I think many of us have been facing different types of backlash at home and across the world, but we're also in unique positions of privilege where we can do something about it. And I think that we just have to remind ourselves anytime we're going through a tough time period, um, you know, we are all in positions because we sought to be in the positions we're in right now. And I think we can never forget that as part of our journeys.
Yeah, I mean, I would really second that and echo what Tom has just said. The Merriam-Webster definition of diversity is the condition of having or being composed of different elements, variety. And when I read that and hear that, I say, well, what's so scary about that, right? The important thing is for us to get different points of view. The problem with our and yeah, at the time of this taping, the problem with this country now is that we just don't listen to each other. And when we don't listen to each other, we don't have a narrative of that person across from us. And we create our own narrative for that individual, right? And when we look at some of the guests, we assume, well, that person has been who they are forever, right? They're the chief of this, they're the chair of that. They went to this school, they had everything handed to them on a silver platter, right? But when you actually, every single guest that I've talked to has been merit-based success to what they have achieved. And every single guest I've talked to have surmounted challenges, many of them like insurmountable challenges. So it's like, wow, how did you do that? Every single guest that Tom and I have interviewed has failed, yet they've recovered from that failure. So my conclusion is every single guest that Tom and I have interviewed are human. They're just like me. They're just like Tom. They're just like you, Sarah. Just like you, Cherie. They are human. And I think as we understand each other, you know, what you may not know about me, I like weird, obscure, like music, right? So, one of the bands that I really liked has disbanded, but it's called Alabama Shakes. Um, one of the lines of their song is, "I just want to touch a human being," right? That's all we want to do is touch another human. And I think this podcast helps us do that. Now, again, I have to give props out to STS because you may a member may ask, well, is this in the STS's lane?
Yeah.
And I would argue it is because every single person we talk to has maniacal dedication to the restoration of health of their patients. And their worldview and their origin story is what drives that maniacal dedication to the restoration of health for their patients. And so very much in the STS's lane, and I'm really happy that STS had the courage to support this podcast.
Okay, so David and I have been in the hot seat for a little bit. Let's turn things around as well. So let me start. I'm going to ask both you, Dr. Erkmen and Dr. Pereira, this question. What have you planned for the future of Same Surgeon, Different Light? And we'll start with Dr. Erkmen first. Go ahead, Cherie.
Of course, I want to keep the winning formula and the storytelling and the human touch. All of that has been so compelling. I think I would like to speak a little bit more loudly to our international roots. We're looking at the international influence of cardiothoracic surgery as it's practiced. And our tradition is that 18 to 24% of cardiothoracic surgeons have a bond to an international training or origin. So I think looking into that story and seeing how we have expanded our community, it will be a large part of what we do in the future. So that's one of the areas that I wanted to explore more. And Sarah, what are you thinking?
Yeah, what do you think, Dr. Pereira? Go ahead.
I think what David said about failure and about, you don't realize when you really look up to people that everybody has gone through something really tough in their career. And I think that's why a lot of people really love these podcasts. So I would really like to bring in folks that have really had personal and professional challenges with their busy careers as cardiothoracic surgeons and really talk to them about, how they came back from adversity, how they made tough choices about prioritizing personal life, family, children, even when to have children. I think what we really struggle with is as women in cardiac surgery, needs to be said on the landscape to help some of our trainees and learners. And so I would really like to interview folks that are willing to share their experiences on how they've navigated their personal and professional careers. Are there any interviews or podcasts, David or Tom? Is there anybody that you want us to bring back and we can interview together? Someone that you missed or someone that you're fascinated by in
Well,
the future?
I think the landscape is really an ample environment. Um, and it'd be interesting to hear, perhaps some of our back of office team folks, like, Elaine Weiss, who's the executive director of the STS, to understand, who's leading our organizations. Some of the we've interviewed students and residents and et cetera. I do want to say that we've invited a lot of folks to interview and we've been turned down, because sometimes being this honest and unvarnished, um, especially if you're not an extrovert, uh, can be put out there and difficult to do. So we've had folks we've invited who never responded to our invite, or or canceled at the last minute and couldn't get back on. So that is a challenge. Um, I think, sometimes group interviews has been very helpful. So you have that back and forth like we are having now. But I think the world is the oyster because there's so much talent out there.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is it's interesting. We're starting to see a trend where cardiothoracic surgeons are broadening their leadership opportunities and getting involved in other spaces that maybe CT surgeons haven't historically gotten involved with. So two examples come to mind right away is, Dr. Africa Wallace and Dr. Kendra Grubb, who were a part of academia and now they're going into industry right now. And so it would be curious just to see, some of the, it's shifting origin stories, right? Is that they were in one area, now they're going to another area, maybe CT surgeons who are now involved in politics. But I agree with David. There's tons of opportunities. And so, yes, could you invite people who've interviewed before in the past? Absolutely. But I think that my gut instinct is that you're probably going to have the harder challenge of there's so many stories to choose from. Which do you go after? And you've probably got many seasons of interviews ahead, to say the least.
Well, speaking of shifting responsibilities and a greater leadership role, we're speaking to you as the newly appointed editor-in-chief of JACS and president of the SUS. So with these larger responsibilities and as a thoracic surgeon, what can we do to foster diversity?
It's a great question, Cherie, and thank you for acknowledging that. I'll be honest, my SUS presidential speech, which will be delivered on February 11th, 2025 in Vegas, the title of the speech is Origin Stories and Cultures of Impact. And there's no question that sharing this experience with David on Same Surgeon, Different Light has inspired me about that. It is that you may not have a full choice in, where you grew up or who your parents are or where your actual origin is, but we all made a choice to come into this field and what drives our choices. And what leads us to build those cultures of impact. That's going to be the highlights of the speech. And of course, diversity is a central core of that message as well. The broader definition of diversity that David eloquently stated. And then for JAX, we are looking for the best in the global world of science. We want to be the home for that. And I look at science as evolving too. When we were all in training, there was one view of science being bench research, and that was it. It goes well beyond that right now. I mean, there's innovation going in global surgery right now, and innovation in quality improvement, and innovation in systems-based research, and innovation in, diversity and inclusion. And what we want the Journal of the American College of Surgeons to be is to be the home for the best in science wherever it comes from around the world. And then the theme that we're aiming for is delivery of surgical expertise at your fingertips. That is, to get the best in science into the journal and then deliver it into the format that our readers will hope to access that information. But those are the vision's broad goals for those two major leadership roles. But I am unbelievably blessed. I mean, I have the best life in the world. I have the best job in the world, family, my partners. Sarah's one of them. I mean, it's just, I'm unbelievably blessed, and I'm hoping that these incredible opportunities that now I have access to, we can continue the message of storytelling, building a better world for all of us.
I just had this epiphany moment listening to you both and interviewing you for this podcast, Tom, that I've always admired you so much, and I've followed in your footsteps as program director for our residency programs. And David, I've always admired you so much and followed in your footsteps on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and now on this podcast. And you have both been so successful and are so incredibly inspiring. So, David, now you are president of the Thoracic Surgery Directors Association. You're on the STS Executive Leadership Board. You've done so many great things locally and nationally. So, where do you think that our specialty organizations are going to go in the future in terms of helping all of our STS members and surgeons?
Well, I'm extremely bullish on the cardiothoracic surgical front. I think on the thoracic side, there's so much in the world of oncology and transplantation that is really exciting and has room for innovation. And then on the cardiovascular side, really complex cardiovascular surgery on both ends of the spectrum, whether it's transcatheter based or really open sequelae of transcatheter, the new transcatheter world. So I think from a clinical and relevant standpoint, we are great. I think your efforts, Sarah, and your efforts, Cherie, in regards to equity, health equity, shows what our specialty is capable of being leaders in this space. The STS support of this podcast for Tom and I. But I want to go back to, Cherie, what you brought up earlier about the demonization of diversity. And what does that mean? I think that organizations, if they want to be relevant and if they want to survive, and if we want new people to come into our specialty so our patients aren't harmed by a lack of cardiothoracic surgeons, we have to be a welcoming, big tent society. And that means hard things are hard. So when the nattering nabobs of negativity are saying diversity is a bad word, we have to look and play the long game and understand that in order for our organizations to be healthy and to survive and to be relevant, we have to be welcoming, have a sense of belonging, and to be inclusive. And that means to to some days being involved in this space has been very beneficial. And then some days being involved in this space, you get some really bad negativity. But if you look at the long game and say, how can we actually be relevant, let alone survive, but be relevant? We can only be relevant if people look at us and say, I want to do that. So that's sort of my thoughts on the matter.
And I do want to say that we are humbled and so appreciative of what you've accomplished, both of you, Tom and David, in your own careers, but also the leadership that you've taken in the front of diversity, and also how you've been able to mentor so many people, Sarah and myself included, so that we can continue the work that you've started. So we also appreciate that STS is continuing to advance their core value of diversity, and that this is a cornerstone of all of our work and all of our future. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you personally, David, Tom, and Sarah as well.
Yeah, thank you all so much. It's been a true privilege to work with you personally and professionally and interview you for our inaugural season. So now we're even more nervous about where we're going to take the podcast series, knowing that we have such huge shoes to fill. So we really appreciate your time and thanks for joining us today.
No, thank you both. This is going to be great, and you better believe David and I will continue to be listening. So this will be fantastic.
Thanks a lot. And now I look forward to my podcast app on my phone to be refreshed and see the STS symbol pop up. And I was like, okay, a new podcast is dropped. Time to go work out.
Yeah.
You'll be fit.
This is great.
Thank you.
This has been Same Surgeon, Different Life, a podcast brought to you by the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, please rate it 5 stars and let your friends, trainees, and colleagues know about it. On social media, you can use the hashtag #TheFaceOfCT More information about the Society of Thoracic Surgeons is available online at sts.org.